Sandra Bullock stood outside Café Lumiere, a very fancy coffee shop in Beverly Hills. She had her hands tucked inside the pockets of her blue hoodie. The brim of her black cap covered most of her face, so no one could see who she really was. She wasn't nervous. Not at all. Sandra had been in much bigger and fancier places, surrounded by important people. Famous actors, powerful directors, and rich business owners. But this was just a cafe. A cafe with golden chandeliers and shiny marble floors. A cafe that people waited weeks just to get into. And now, a cafe manager was looking at her, deciding she didn't belong. His name was Gerald. Gerald loved his job. He loved being in charge of who got to come in and who had to stay out. He could tell just by looking at someone if they were important enough to sit in his cafe. And to him, Sandra Bullock did not look important. Gerald sighed loudly, staring at her like she was a problem. "Look, lady," he said, shaking his head. "This isn't the right place for you." Sandra, always calm and patient, raised an eyebrow. "Oh, really?" Gerald smirked. "Yes. We only serve very special people. Our guests have to make reservations weeks ahead." He looked at her clothes, a simple hoodie, sweatpants, and sneakers, and shook his head. "We have a certain standard," he added. Sandra tilted her head, still smiling. "And I don't meet that standard, do I?" Gerald let out a small laugh. "I think we both know the answer." Sandra didn't say anything back. She just watched him, her expression calm. Gerald didn't know why, but something about her made him uneasy. Nearby, at one of the outdoor tables, a group of well-dressed women noticed what was happening. They were rich socialites, women who loved fancy things and expensive places. One of them was Madison, a famous influencer. She had millions of followers online, and she loved making fun of people who she thought didn't belong. Madison was wearing big sunglasses and a perfect white designer outfit. She smirked as she watched the scene unfold. Then she pulled out her phone. She secretly took a picture of Sandra standing at the cafe entrance and quickly posted it online. Madison Lale _official. Some woman in a hoodie is trying to get into Café Lumiere. Some places just aren't for everyone, babe. As soon as she hit post, the likes and comments started pouring in. Madison giggled. "It's always funny when they think confidence can buy them class," she said. The other women at the table laughed softly, throwing judgmental glances at Sandra. Sandra had no idea about the post. She kept her focus on Gerald. "I actually have a friend who comes here all the time." Gerald let out a loud scoff. "Oh, let me guess. You know people?" Sandra's smile did not fade. "Something like that." Gerald rolled his eyes. "Right. Because people who know people show up in hoodies and baseball caps." Inside the cafe, some of the customers chuckled. They were enjoying the moment, watching Sandra get turned away. But Sandra stayed quiet, watching Gerald closely. For the first time, Gerald felt nervous. Sandra took a small breath. "How about I just get a coffee to go?" Gerald raised an eyebrow. "Our coffee isn't exactly for everyone." Sandra nodded slowly as if she was thinking about that. "And what makes your coffee so special?" Gerald smirked, leaning in slightly. He loved feeling superior. "It's about the experience," he said. "The exclusivity. The kind of people who come here." Then he smirked again, eyeing her outfit. "The standards." Sandra tilted her head, absorbing his words. Then she simply replied, "Interesting." She wasn't mad. She wasn't flustered. She was just waiting. And Gerald had no idea what was about to happen next. Madison refreshed her phone, excited to see more comments on her post. But something was wrong. The comments were changing. People were starting to recognize the woman in the picture. Kapile 99. "Wait, isn't that Sandra Bullock?" Movie Geeka. "That's Sandra Bullock." Onji. "Stan Sandra forever." Madison, you just posted about a Hollywood legend. Alpine 99. "Delete this before you embarrass yourself more." Madison's smile disappeared. She stared at her phone, her stomach twisting into knots. Then, very slowly, she lifted her head and looked at Sandra again. For the first time, she really looked. The sharp jawline. The natural beauty. The quiet confidence. Oh no. Madison's face paled. She had just made fun of one of the most famous actresses in the world. Gerald sighed loudly. He was getting bored of this conversation. "All right," he said, crossing his arms. "I think I've entertained this long enough." He stared at Sandra, his eyes cold and dismissive. "I'm afraid I have to ask you to leave," he said. "We don't serve just anyone." Sandra let out a quiet sigh, looking down for a moment. Then she nodded. "All right." And without another word, she turned around and walked away. Inside the cafe, whispers spread through the air. Some customers were grinning, pleased that Gerald had turned someone away. But others? Others were getting nervous. Someone pulled out their phone and Googled Sandra Bullock. The second they saw her pictures, their eyes went wide. People started mumbling. That was Sandra Bullock. Oh my gosh, it really was her. Gerald just kicked out an Oscar-winning actress. Gerald, who had been so smug just a moment ago, started to feel sick. Then one of the waiters rushed up to him, panicked. Gerald, do you know what you just did? He whispered. Gerald frowned. What are you talking about? The waiter held up his phone. On the screen was Madison's post, now flooded with thousands of angry comments. People weren't laughing anymore. They were furious. Gerald's face turned pale. He looked at the door where Sandra had disappeared, and for the first time he realized he had just made a huge mistake. Gerald took a deep breath, feeling very proud of himself. He thought he had done his job perfectly. He believed he had made the right decision. But he had no idea. In just a few minutes, everything would go terribly wrong. His choice, the one he thought was smart, was actually the biggest mistake of his career. His entire world, along with Café Lumiere's famous reputation, was about to come crashing down. Gerald thought he had won. But just around the corner, someone else was on their way to Café Lumiere. And when they arrived, everything would change. Gerald stood near the cafe entrance, feeling happy. He had just turned away another guest. He loved doing this. He thought it was his job to decide who was good enough to be inside Café Lumiere. Moments ago, he had refused to let a woman inside. She had been wearing a hoodie and a baseball cap. She didn't look fancy enough for his cafe, so he had told her to leave. Now, to him, everything was back to normal. Inside the cafe, rich and important people sat at their tables, drinking coffee and whispering to each other. There were social media stars, people who loved showing off their expensive clothes and perfect lives. There were business people who spent big money just to sit in the cafe. Everything was exactly how Gerald liked it. Nobody was thinking about that woman he had sent away. But outside, something was happening. And Gerald had no idea that in just a few moments, his entire world would collapse. It started with a young waiter. He was standing near the window, refilling a guest's water. It was just another normal day for him. Then he looked outside. And he froze. His hands started shaking. The water he was pouring almost spilled. His eyes became huge. The older waiter next to him noticed. "What's wrong?" the older waiter asked. The young waiter didn't even blink. He whispered, "Oh my God." The older waiter turned to look outside. And then he froze too. Because walking toward Café Lumiere, moving through the street so easily like he belonged everywhere, was Keanu Reeves. Keanu Reeves walked with confidence. He wore a black blazer, comfortable jeans, and had that special kind of calm power that made people turn their heads. People on the street noticed him immediately. Some gasped. Others pulled out their phones, raising them in the air to take pictures and videos. Pedestrians stopped walking. Some just stood there, mouths open. Inside the cafe, people felt the shift. It was like the air had changed. At a table full of social media influencers, Madison Label's face turned pale. First, she had laughed at Sandra Bullock. And now, Keanu Reeves was here? Her stomach twisted with fear. Gerald, still not understanding what was happening, kept talking to an important guest. He rolled his eyes. "People just don't understand exclusivity these days," he said, shaking his head. Then suddenly, the cafe went completely silent. A strange, electric feeling filled the air. Gerald finally looked up. And that's when he saw him. Keanu Reeves. Gerald gasped. His breath got stuck in his throat. Why was Keanu Reeves walking toward his cafe? Why was he coming straight to the entrance? Before Gerald could move, the door swung open. The bell above the door chimed softly. And Keanu Reeves stepped inside. The whole cafe held its breath. Keanu didn't have to say a word. He was Keanu Reeves. And right now he looked serious, focused. Gerald quickly put on his best fake smile. "Mr. Reeves, what an honor. Please, let me get you a table right away." But Keanu didn't even look at him. He walked right past Gerald. Straight to the back of the cafe. Straight to the outdoor seating area. Straight toward Sandra Bullock. Sandra had just sat down at a small outdoor table. She had been thinking about leaving. But something told her to stay. And now she was so glad she did. She watched Gerald's world fall apart in real time. She grinned as Keanu reached her table. His serious face melted into a warm, familiar smile. "Hey, Sandy." Sandra smirked. "Hey, Keanu. Fancy seeing you here." Gerald's jaw dropped. Madison Label, still at her table, felt her heart race. She had just posted about Sandra Bullock like she was some nobody, mocking her, making fun of her. And now, Keanu Reeves was here? Her influencer reputation was crumbling before her eyes. The cafe guests, the staff, everyone stared in shock. Keanu chuckled and sat across from Sandra. "It's been too long since we had coffee together," he said. Sandra tilted her head. Her voice was sweet but amused. "Well, I tried to get a coffee inside," she said, pretending to be curious. "But apparently this place is very exclusive." Keanu's smile faded slightly. His eyes narrowed. Then he turned his gaze toward Gerald. Gerald felt his heart start racing. His hands got sweaty. Keanu's voice was calm, but there was something dangerous in it. "Oh, is that so?" Keanu said. Gerald stammered. "And Mr. Reeves, I didn't realize. I mean, we have rules." Keanu tilted his head slightly. His voice was softer now, but somehow it was even scarier. "So, you wouldn't serve my friend a coffee?" The cafe went dead silent. Gerald's face turned bright red. "Sir, if I had known." Keanu leaned forward slightly. His voice was gentle but sharp. "So, if she wasn't my friend, you would have kept treating her like she wasn't good enough to be here?" A guest whispered to another, "If they treated Sandra Bullock like that, imagine how they treat normal people." A businessman near the window stood up suddenly. "I don't support places that judge people like this. I'm leaving." More and more people grabbed their bags. They threw money on the table. And they walked out. Gerald watched in horror as his most important customers vanished. Madison Label, realizing she had been recording the whole thing, quickly deleted her post. She shoved her phone into her purse. But it was too late. Then Gerald's phone buzzed. His hands were shaking as he pulled it from his pocket. It was a message from the owner of Café Lumière. His heart pounded as he clicked it open. And the words on the screen made his blood turn cold. "You're fired. Pack your things and leave immediately." Gerald felt dizzy. His cafe, his job, his reputation, gone. Just like that. Sandra took a slow sip of her coffee. Keanu leaned back in his chair, watching Gerald with calm eyes. Madison Label, shaking, grabbed her bag and ran out of the cafe. And outside, the crowd kept growing, because the internet had already found out what had happened. Café Lumière, once a place of exclusivity, was now a joke. And Gerald? Well, he was already forgotten. If you enjoyed this story, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and let me know what you think. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more exciting stories filled with adventure, mystery, and unforgettable moments. Your support means the world. It keeps these stories coming and the creativity flowing. Thanks for watching, and I can't wait to see you in the next video.